Next, from the press briefing room at the state capitol, GOP senators speak out over what they believe is a new NRI program, siphoning millions from at-risk youth. The legislators accuse Governor Quinn of shuffling millions of dollars into a rebranded version of his now-defunct Neighborhood Recovery Initiative and accelerating the pace of handouts as the election nears. This runs about 30 minutes.
What is the now known as the NRI audit, this being the Legislative Audit Commission's role, statutory role, in reviewing an audit performed of the Illinois Violence Prevention Authority's program that has been coined and called NRI. We've spent months on this, and throughout the process, I think we've heard repeatedly from the Quinn administration that this is old news, that there's nothing to be seen here. You know, quote after quote, we've got some of the quotes from the administration on our board here, quote after quote from the Quinn administration, the old news, that the program's been abolished, that the agency that administered the program was abolished, that the program was shut down. He says it's old news. It was 2 years ago or more that this thing was shut down. And he's really hinged his credibility on the fact that he claims, errantly so, that this is old news and that there's no NRI today. The reality is that it is clear, albeit in a rebranded name, NRI is continuing in a very real effect today, and it's occurring in a way that is having an incredibly detrimental effect to communities in the district that I represent, as well as communities throughout the state, whether they be in Chicago, in the suburbs, downstate, or otherwise. And just to give you some background, so we have uncovered here evidence of this continuance of this program. And let me just give you the background of how this came to our attention. I was alerted by a local provider of mine that there had been a cut this year after the budget was adopted. The budget, it is what it is, but this year's budget included $16.5 million to a program called CCBYS. CCBYS is a program that benefits 6,900 some youth in the year 2013. It is a program that is available to communities all across the state, and in fact there are providers throughout the state, including in my district. There's a provider in Bloomington. And the programs that are provided through the CCBYS funds primarily help troubled youth. They help your homeless youth, your battered youth, and again, it's a transparent program. It's a program for which there's transparency. The dollars are competitively bid. If you think about many of the problems we've discovered in NRI, you would say, well, you wouldn't expect to see this in CCBYS because it's a competitively bid program. So there's some $16.5 million allocated to CCBYS in the budget. And since the adoption of the budget, what we've seen recently is a shift of some $5 million out of that program that would help some of our troubled youth, and a providing of that $5 million to what are clearly clones of the NRI program existing today in the city of Chicago. And, lo and behold, here we are in the weeks before, yet again, a bitter, divisive, and what we know will be a close November election. The programs that are going to benefit from this $5 million that has been taken away from our local providers, you have to ask the question of, so where does the money go? We can tell you where it's coming from, and it's coming from communities like mine. And what it means to a community like mine is that we're not going to have the services available for our troubled youth, for our homeless youth and others, because they've taken the money away from the providers for them, and they've given it to many of the same agencies that were identified in the NRI audit. Some of you remember Chicago Area Project. Chicago Area Project is named throughout the NRI audit. I think we've raised concerns about the fact that Chicago Area Project has as on their payroll Circuit Clerk Dorothy Brown's husband. Chicago Area Project owes the state of Illinois at least a few $100,000, yet here we are this year, the state of Illinois has already provided Chicago Area Project $1 million for programs that look eerily similar to the NRI, the programs that were the subject of the NRI audit. And so what does it mean? You know, what it means to me is with every dollar that the Quinn administration takes away from communities like mine, he's providing it to his politically connected pals in Chicago. He's doing it ahead of an election, and he's doing it while he's saying he's not. So every time we hear the governor say, don't worry about the NRI program, we've shut it down, the reality is you just follow the money, and what the money shows you here is that he's trying to benefit some of these same providers that are all over the NRI audit in the weeks before this election. So with that, I want to turn it over to my colleagues and then have an opportunity to take some questions when we're through. Senator LaHood.
Thank you, Senator Barackman. Darren LaHood, 37th District in Peoria. And I want to talk specifically about a particular agency in my district, the Center for Youth and Family Services, which is a provider in the Peoria area. It's based in West Peoria. I recently did a tour there. They house about 16 at-youth risks there, at-risk youth there, and a very well-run program. And they recently found out they're getting cut as a part of this diversion. Now, what you have to remember, this is a well-run organization. They were told they're getting this money. They received the initial money through a very transparent RFP program, played by the rules, and then to be told that that money is now being diverted and going to Chicago, they kind of scratch their head and say, what's going on? Why is this money being diverted? And to try to find an explanation about that is really difficult in this process. It clearly violates the rules that are in place. The Auditor General has said this is a violation, but it's going on right now. Then the second thing is, well, where is the money going? Well, when you look at that chart, that money's going to Chicago, not only to Chicago, but to the very agencies that are under federal investigation right now. So, you know, the fact that that money is going there, it's under grand jury investigation by the U.S. Attorney's Office in 2 districts, by the way, not only in the Central District, but the Northern District. And so people in my district with the particular agency, the Center for Youth and Family Services, you know, are wondering what's going on. And that is very, very troubling to see this happening, again, as was referenced earlier, so close to an election. We saw what happened 4 years ago. This is a very thing. Obviously, nothing has deterred the Quinn administration for continuing to engage in this practice of trying to buy votes in Chicago. And it's frustrating for my constituents and this particular agency in my district and for people all over the state.
Good afternoon. My name is Dale Ryder. I represent the 55th District in Illinois, a 14-county district, East Central and Southeastern Illinois. There isn't a single member of the General Assembly, Republican, Democrat, Chicago area, downstate, collar counties, unless they've been living under a rock for the last several years, who hasn't heard repeatedly from their human service providers, we keep getting squeezed, we keep getting cut. We can't provide the services for the at-risk families and the at-risk youth that we need to because there's not enough money out there. And we hear, particularly from Governor Pat Quinn, that he is there for those people, that he is battling for funds for those people to help make sure that when there's an at-risk youth who reaches out to a counselor at 2 o'clock in the morning with a crisis, a breaking point for that child, that the funding is there to make sure the counselor is there to make sure that that youth receives the services that they need. What's before us here and what Senator Barackman, who has done yeoman's work on the Audit Commission, and Senator LaHood have talked about to you so far is a process. And that is the Quinn administration doing exactly what it did 4 years ago, despite the fact that there are at least 3 grand jury subpoenas out there in and around the Quinn administration about what he did 4 years ago. He's doing exactly what he did 4 years ago, and that is take money that was appropriated by the General Assembly into a transparent program, meaning the public and the legislators, the taxpayers could follow who was applying for that money, what kind of criteria did they bring, what kind of qualifications did they bring, and who got the money awarded to them, to a much less transparent program where the money can be spent on whatever timeline Pat Quinn decides it'll be spent on, in whatever fashion Pat Quinn wants it spent on, and whoever. And you see on these charts right here, that money moved to that program that has all but no transparency, and then ferreted out to these politically connected groups. Exactly what we saw in 2010 here, a little over a month before an election. This issue raises not just the very real impact that it has, not just on Chicago communities, because there is this kind of thing out there that all of this process, the investigation with regards to NRI and what the governor obviously continues to do is just a Chicago area thing. No, it's not. Because the dollar that goes to the CJA, the less transparent fund, is the dollar that could have gone to Bloomington or Peoria or Mattoon or other downstate areas to serve the use about which we are talking. And it raises kind of the twin-headed monster that is the hypocrisy of the Quinn administration on this particular issue. First, that the governor says repeatedly, in fact, there's not a day that goes by that we don't hear Pat Quinn in a TV commercial or in person say, I discovered the problems with NRI, I ended it. Program's over. We fixed the problem. We took responsibility and fixed the program. That is obviously not true. But the second head of that is that Pat Quinn is the one who says he stands up for the people who need these services. At the very same time, with his political hand, he's taking that money away from them and using it for other purposes.
Questions? Kurt?
You say it's 5 million, when I add up those questions, to 20-something million, does that mean, how much is really the issue here?
Well, we know 5 million was moved. It was transferred from DHS to CJA. It was taken away from CCBYS, and we know a significant portion of that 5 million has already been spent. I can't give you an exact number at the moment, but a significant portion of it has been spent.
Has the Chicago area project money been spent or just merely appropriated?
Well, we know the Chicago area project has been appropriated $1 million out of this year.
So you don't have any sense yet whether this internal review that Quinn was talking about is over with and they've been given a clean bill of health?
Well, no, the question here is why did the Quinn administration take it away from the beneficiaries of CCBYS and give it to a fund that is under a federal investigation, regardless of his own review?
Is there did all of the 5 million come from one program within DHS?
It came directly from CCBYS.
That is a DHS program?
Yes.
I thought, okay. And notwithstanding the NRI, the end result here, is there anything wrong with the transfers?
Well, I think the transfers are one of the questionable actions that have been flagged in the audit. And I think we will hear more about the Auditor General's position on those transfers next week in Chicago.
Well, it seems to me that the most egregious things we've heard about NRI is that this money was given to people to march in parades. I don't know if that's an outlier or if that's something that happened, in a prevalent fashion. Do you have anything like that here?
Well, I don't know that we know how this money's being spent. We only know what history suggests, which is one questionable act after another.
How's Governor Rauner going to fix this in January?
Well, I think, this is a problem and a question for the legislature. When the legislature adopts a budget, I mean, look, people are going to vote for it and against it. Well, once the vote is over, you expect the governor to honor the intentions of the legislature. And what we see here is that the legislature intended to appropriate $16.5 million for at-risk youth, and the governor, in a single act, has taken away some of that money and diverted it to these NRI-like programs.
Which goes to my question earlier. He does have some transfer authority, does he not? I know that the audit questioned the amount, but...
Correct. No, I think the Auditor General has questioned the legality of some of these transfers. But sure, the governor has transferred money, and I'm not questioning the legality. I think the Auditor General has, though.
Well, it seems to me that when we were having the hearings earlier this year about NRI, some people took pains to point out, this really isn't political, and the Auditor General's report came out at such and such a time, and now we're having this, and now it just so happens the next hearing is kind of close to the election, but it's not. Is there any pretense that now this isn't political?
Well,
Given the governor's alleged actions and what you're calling them out on?
The politics here are a governor who has accelerated the spending of $5 million that should be benefiting at-risk youth around the state, and instead he's diverting that money to those agencies that are under the NRI audit and arguably a part of an ongoing federal investigation.
And it's purely political. You're not even going to pretend that it's not.
I don't know what his intentions are, but I know that it's detrimental to my constituents and constituents around the state that he's doing this. The politics, though, here, remember, why are we at next month's hearing? Are a result of a series of actions for which Republicans and Democrats have agreed upon. We agreed to do the audit, 100 yes votes in the House to audit this program. Speaker Mike Madigan himself voted in favor of the audit. We voted in a series of votes to subpoena and then to subpoena 7 specific witnesses. Those votes were taken, bipartisan support all along the way. And then the vote to schedule a hearing next week was a vote that had unanimous support from Republicans and Democrats. So it is what it is. I think we have a job to do in reviewing the audit, and we have a job to do to look out for taxpayers and providers and beneficiaries of these programs, and we're simply trying to raise the public's awareness of this.
What is it that you think will be raised next week relative to this?
Well, you know, Ray, at every hearing, there has been at least a suggestion from some Quinn supporter or Quinn ally that this is all old news and that that everything's been fixed and there's nothing to worry about. And clearly, what this shows us is that those beliefs are wrong. They're inaccurate, and that we in the legislature have to do more to come up with a solution so that whether it's Governor Quinn or Governor Rauner, so that the legislature and their budgeting process is not shirked in the way that's happened here. Well, I can tell you about the conversation I had with my provider. And remember, this issue was brought to my attention by a local provider to me, an individual from what is called Project Oz, which is a provider in Bloomington, Illinois. OZ contacted me and said, we were of the understanding that we were going to that providers like us around the state would have available $16.5 million for this type of program. And he said, we've now been told that $5 million of that $16.5 has been moved and is no longer available. What does it mean to him financially? I can't give you the specific number, Ray, but I asked him, I said, what does this mean for the community that I represent? And he said, well, we have a large geographic area, and we hire caseworkers who are available to take that phone call at 2 in the morning when there's a youth who says, I don't have a place to go home to. And he says, because the money has been diverted here, I now have to redo my budget, and I'm afraid I'm not going to have those services available to all of the footprint of which I'm supposed to serve.
And so was everybody, so this was one in your district, right? Are there others in your district?
Yeah, well, there are others, and I think we've got, I can't see which one's where, but these are throughout the state. And just because a provider is located in Bloomington, for example, does not mean they're limited to providing services just in Bloomington. That provider, I believe, provides to McLean, at least McLean and Livingston counties. Last year's budget was, that line had about an $11 million appropriation.
So that was bumped
It was increased.
by 5. And then this
And one of the questions that we have is, we don't know why it was increased by 5. The providers would tell you that they wanted the additional dollars. In fact, they've spent years asking for those additional dollars. But I'm not sure who put the extra 5 million in there, but we're seeing who clearly knew it was there and has now moved it out.
And so does Chicago get a piece of the underlying subset of the 11 million, for example, in the prior year, or was it all divvied up?
Well, CCBOIS benefits, it's a statewide program, so I presume, yeah, Chicago is a beneficiary of it, just like Bloomington. The 5 million, though, goes into the fund, I think it's a CJA fund. It's Fund 318, I believe. I'm looking at my staff to correct me when I go off, accurate here, but I believe it's Fund 318. And for those of you who've really looked at the NRI audit, Fund 318 is at the center of the questionable spending of all of those tens of millions of NRI dollars. That fund is outside the appropriations process. There's the transparency that we would expect with other funds, like CCBYS, does not exist in Fund 318. And I think it's clear the administration has learned that they can manipulate the spending by diverting money out of